Good evening, friends. This evening session is dedicated to class 11 and we are doing question answers of the lesson the address. The very first question, that is a long answer question, is that justify the title of the story. Why did the narrator resolve to forget the address? Why all of the things she had to forget? So the first part, justify the title of the story, address. Well, the narrator Marga Minko titles the story the address. The title is quite significant, meaningful, and relevant. See, the narrator and her mother lived in Holland, which was war affected. During the war, the narrator suffers a personal loss. Not only she loses her mother, but she also has to hand over all the belongings of her mother to one of the neighbors, Mrs. Dorling, the custodian of those belongings, who assures the narrator and her family that she would keep the things in safe custody, and at the time when the war will be over, they will collect it. So, after the war is over, the narrator is the lonely survivor. She has already lost her mother, she is the lonely survivor. So, she recalls now to get back all the belongings, the beautiful belongings of her mother, which she really thinks are important. Treasure for her. So, as her mother has given the address 46 Marconi Street, she reaches the address. She meets the lady Mrs. Dorling, whose name has been referred by her mother when she was alive. But the lady Mrs. Dorling even fails to recognize. She deliberately doesn't want to recognize her, and not is ready to sacrifice or not ready to return the belongings of the narrator's mother. The narrator feels quite upset and she goes back home. Second time, she comes back and she's being received by the narrator, Mrs. Dorling's daughter. She's being taken inside, and when she looks at the things like the silver cutlery, teapot, the beautiful tablecloth, the big vase, the the teapot, the tablecloth, and the beautiful cutleries, silver cutleries, the antique plates. All these things, when the narrators saw them, they were all just in a shabby condition. They were kept quite, in a haphazard manner. Quite shabbily they were kept. Having seen the beautiful belongings of her mother kept shabbily and in a scattered manner, she feels very upset and she gets pained because she understands that these beautiful silver cutlery, these beautiful silver pots and the antique plates were so precious at time when the true owner, her mother, was alive. So, having found those things kept in shabbily in a disarranged and chaotic manner, she feels very bad and she decides to, forget them, because that really gives her pain. Because the things which her mother has, bought one by one with a greater pain and care, all these things were now kept by Mrs. Dorling in a very haphazard manner. And that also she is not ready to return them. So, having undergone this kind of feeling, she decides to forget the address and forget those things, and therefore she goes back without taking those belongings, thinking that they are not worth of anything, because when the true owner of those belongings is not alive, it is quite meaningless to bother about those things. They will only give her pain, so it's better to forget them, and that is the reason why she decides to forget them. And that thus the title is quite significant and relevant to the fact. Next question: how and why were all the nice things of Mrs. Mrs. is taken away by Mrs. Darling. The war in Holland, you know, brought a lot of disturbances. Mrs. Darling exploited Mrs. S, and she assures her that she would be the real custodian of her belongings. She will keep them in safe custody. And these things were handed over to Mrs. Darling by the narrator's mother. And believing that these things will be returned when the things will be normal, these things consisted of silver cutlery, crockery, antique plates, and other teapots and other things. Mrs. Darling has taken one by one all these beautiful things. Next question: how did the narrator feel that she had rung the wrong bell, and how was she assured that she was at the right place? When the narrator gave the bell, a woman appeared. She was looking at her quite searchingly. She refuses to recognize the narrator. The narrator felt that perhaps she has come to a wrong door. But when the narrator saw that woman, wearing her mother's, gown, she was wearing her mother's gown. When she looked at her face, she had been wearing her mother knitted cardigan, and that really assured the narrator that it was the right address. Next question: do you justify the cold behavior of Mrs. Darling towards the narrator? Give reasons. No, Mrs. Darling was not at all a good human being. She was very cold and inhuman and unfriendly towards the narrator. Her behavior cannot be justified. She even refused to recognize the narrator. She didn't even mention that these belongings were of her mother, narrator's mother. So the narrator, despite the fact that she reminded her that she was the lady when she used to come when her mother was alive, and she had taken all these beautiful and precious belongings of her mother when her mother was alive, she had seen her coming to her house several times. Despite all these mention, she was not ready to even recognize her. So this clearly suggests that the treatment given by Mrs. Darling to the narrator was quite cold and quite inhuman. How could the woman refuse to recognize the narrator when she had already been to several times to her house? She had already been to her house several times. When her mother was alive, she often visited her house, and one by one she took the precious belongings like the silver cutlery, the teapot, the kitchen cloth, and many other things she had taken. Despite the fact that she had already seen this girl present at the time when she had taken away all these belongings, she was refusing to return them. And what to talk about returning the belongings? She was not even ready to acknowledge her presence and recognize her. This clearly suggests that she was quite inhuman and quite, cold in behavior, and that behavior cannot be justified. Thank you. Have a nice day ahead.